Live. So welcome everybody welcome to Waiting for the Future. Yeah, that's what we're here for. WFTF. Hey Josh.
WFTF. Yes. Hey.
I find it hard. The WFTF, it looks so much like WTF.
Well, that's why it's a cool abbreviation,
That's the
because that's the
for.
whole point of why it's a good abbreviation, I would say.
Good. So we're waiting for the future. You're already in space, but I want to welcome anybody who's watching, who's watching this. Like we were talking into the void. I always find it so funny. But eventually somebody's going to be watching this and see that we want to have this conversation about technology. We're both super interested in technology, and we've had these conversations. We started them, I think, during COVID, me and you, Josh. And maybe it's good if we introduce ourselves, like who we are, why we're doing this, and how we're going to talk about space today and moon bases that are coming up. But Josh, you want to give it a go and introducing yourself?
Yes, I'm Josh. I've worked in technology, I guess, close to 20 years now. Maybe it's like 18 years, getting super old. It's great. But I think one of the things that Tyson and I shared in common is kind of being annoyed or ticked off that we've been reading about these emerging technologies or these things or these benefits that should be coming to us. Like, why don't we already live in space? Why don't we already have cool brain computers? Why don't we already live forever? Things like that. And that sentiment, I think, has kind of driven us to talk about these things and maybe have a different view on our expectations for the future than maybe some other people would. So, but yeah, having a practical knowledge of technology, I say, is also is my background.
And so I have a background in both journalism. So my name is Thijs Roes. I have a YouTube channel on here somewhere else that you can go and look at. So I have some YouTube experience, but I've always been interested in technology, but I went sort of like the history and journalism route at some point in my life. And in the past 10 years or so, have gotten back to more sort of my tech angle on things. And I now work in sustainability. I have a podcast about space. I also have done a lot about drug policy, and also maybe relevant to mention, you're in New York, where I used to live, and that's how we know each other. Nowadays, you're in New Amsterdam. I'm in Old Amsterdam, so I'm back in the Netherlands. We also have that Euro-American connection going on, which I think is really a cool sort of like different ways of looking at the world that we can combine here. And indeed, that sort of idea, I had it especially with electric vehicles about 10 years ago, where it was very apparent that it was going to happen. There were going to be, especially in the Netherlands, kind of far ahead. I could see it emerging, but even 7-8 years in, and I'm still a little bit like, so where are they all? Like I when I see some sort of like car sewer full of exhausts, I'm like, shouldn't we have already switched to like something better by now? And then also hearing the detractors of all these technologies talk about it. So it's always been interesting, like how, and whenever a new technology comes up, people are super afraid of it and are, what's the right word? Suspicious of it, I guess.
Luddites. Well, yeah, the Luddites of the third industrial revolution.
I think so.
And yeah, people are scared of change. Just like the, industrialization threatened jobs that you can't turn on the news now without there being articles about AI and ML threatening jobs.
Right.
If you're in the service industry, if you're someone that drives cars for a living or works at the checkout counter, a large portion of the workforce, the labor force, can be automated or would be automated in the near future. So then what do they do? So exactly. That's scary. Change is scary.
And so I think that today we can talk about something that's come up recently, which is our sort of new venture to the moon. Because I think the moon is clearly one of those things where people, even our parents, thought that people would be living on the moon by now. People are not living on the moon, seems like. But there are... but there are definitely plans to go back there within a few years, and I think it's super interesting to dive into. So the concept of today is also to screen share some stuff, watch stuff together, and we're gonna do this for as many episodes as we like doing this. So this is just our first pilot, and I think we should just dive into it. So let's see. I think maybe I want to share the NASA website. How about that? So
Yeah, I was
uh,
watching the NASA propaganda videos this morning and getting really emotional. They were quite effective. And
you think
I don't know if I'm just more cynical now, but or if it's just changed, but the commercialization or like the private sector's role is very prominent, I think now, but it still plugs at the heartstrings.
it does? If you watch this, I mean, I think it does. We aspire something, become something, right?
Spun industries all their own.
I would say for any European, this would instantly look like an American video, like high in emotion, dramatic.
Yeah, you think we over romanticize, over dramatize things?
I think so a little bit. It's all about so a lot of this is there's something about space that sort of appeals to sort of our highest ideals, right? Exploration, rediscovering ourselves and our place in space and time. On the other hand, there's a clear geopolitical element involved in this all as well. The Artemis Accords, as they are called, are pretty much a collaboration of a lot of countries to go back to the moon together. And I do think that that's a lot better than maybe what happened 50 years ago when the US was in the middle of the Cold War and just pretty much wanted to show, like, hey, we can do this. I do find it very interesting that this is one of this is a Trumpian heritage. This all started under Trump. Not all of it, of course. Like there was a moon program or whatnot.
But there was a section in here on the NASA website where it kind of like I think referenced a presidential order, but it didn't say the president, but it just said like presidential decree, and it was kind of like NASA didn't.
Whose was that again?
Yeah, which one was that?
But we are going to the moon, and I thought what was cool on our side of the pond is that so the Netherlands, the country I live in, just signed on, which is cool because we can now claim that our country is going to the moon as well. What's cool about it is it's going to be this wide infrastructure of different steps to get to the moon, where I think the US is going to be crucial, and especially SpaceX is going to be crucial in this. But like you said, like the private industry took this over, but there's a lot of competition going on there as well. That's both, sometimes it's a bit dramatic, but it's exciting as well because there's so many new startups happening in space right now. Anything like from thrusters to software to habitable modules or landers or whatnot. And you can really see in the last 5 years that there's this gigantic new industry that's being booted up. Even though, looking at this picture, do you know what the Space Launch System is? The SLS rocket? Josh?
I was reading about it this morning, but I'm sure you know more than I. Yeah.
So it looks a little bit like the space shuttle, and that's not a
well, like the thruster for the space shuttle. Yeah,
the thruster for the space shuttle, because it's pretty much a remake of the space shuttle, which was a very, I mean, it was an attempt at reusability for rockets, and it, it was a shuttle that could land like an airplane, but because NASA and just space exploration in general was such a government endeavor, there's a huge government program that has been trying to keep this rocket alive. So they retooled these boosters and these rockets and these engines.
Boeing, right? I think
it's it's Boeing and the ULA, the United Launch Alliance, I think, is doing this. Boeing is, I think, Orion, but this is at a certain point it starts becoming a little vague to me as well. The bottom line is that SLS is a very big, inefficient program that had to be canceled 20 years ago. But
they don't want to give the full pie to Elon, so they have to give some slices to others, right?
A little bit, and I mean the jobs that are involved in also the Deep South, Alabama, and also in Texas, are too significant to sort of like give up. It would let entire old legacy industries collapse, so they don't want to do that. So SLS has been really kept alive. It's been on life support for a very long time, even though Uncle Elon and SpaceX have completely decimated the cost of getting anything to orbit or to the moon. So We can check in on in a second with SpaceX, but I wonder how you look at all of this, like what you're saying with how private industry is taking this over, opposites like governments.
Well, like it's like some of the there's like nation states, there's some sort of global affairs, world affairs study in here, but yeah. So I was reading what I thought was interesting. I was kind of doing my homework on the Artemis stuff and reading up. There's the gateway station, right? And so there's the actual station that orbits, and then there's different teams, kind of different countries breaking up who's going to contribute what to the gateway and those systems. There's resupply and autonomous payload delivery systems, and there's different countries contributing to that. And then the base itself has all the different modules where there's habitats, and I think like Japan's doing like the living habitats, and so it's kind of like each country was dividing its pot, getting a little piece of this. Russia, in the NASA announcement, Russia was mentioned. This is like they were volunteered or offered to help, but it didn't specify what part. But I think they volunteered for the gateway part. But I thought that was interesting. If you're a conspiracy theorist, you're doing like risk assessment on there. It's like, oh, well, that's the whole way you supply the space station. So if one wanted to hold rounds hot, anyways. So
if the Russians wanted to screw with things, they could.
Yeah, if one were writing exactly a novel.
It's super valid. It's like this huge infrastructural layout of anything from getting anything to orbit, refueling, going to the moon, orbiting with it. So indeed, like the gateway station is like, imagine ISS, like going around, like the International Space Station going around the Earth.
It's going to be a legit space station, exactly, that will be bigger and permanent. It'll probably be, potentially one of like humanity's first permanent, like space habitats, right? Like if we right, like it's not going to be decommissioned. If it like, what's its if we're going to keep it up forever and ever, basically, then
burn it up in the atmosphere. That's an interesting part. It's like the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so the International Space Station is one day going to burn up in the atmosphere. I'm not sure how we're going to do that with a space station
that's working as intended, right? Like, because we could spin the fuel to keep it in orbit.
We could send it into the Pacific.
Those have ran their operational lifespan, like they're done, they're ready to be decommissioned, I guess. But this is something, the gateway is something that presumably would be built upon for generations, and I'm sure whatever nougaty core is first built will just end up being like a monument in the middle of some other space station later. But I don't know if you read about, if you're you can speak to it better than I, but the orbit seemed really interesting, and the orbit they chose, and there's a lot of documentation on the NASA site that we could link to as well, and like the description of the video. But they it's designed to keep 24-hour or close to 24-hour contact with Earth, and then like optimize that ability so you could have this close pass by of the moon, but then it also has this giant loop where it goes away from the moon.
Oh, crazy.
So yeah, it's got an interesting orbit that where both Earth and the moon's gravity are in play, I think, to like minimize or to maximize fuel efficiency, minimize the use of fuel.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, so there's a ton of engineering. There's Artemis 2, which I guess is happening later this year, which is a manned flight where they're just gonna go buy it, and then Artemis 3 is next year where they actually land, and they're there. They're on the moon. They're on the south pole of the moon.
And I think the question right now is still what is going to land on the moon, who is going to land at that moment, because they probably want to do a bunch of trial runs. But so SpaceX got the contract to make the moon lander. So to make the idea a little bit more clear, so indeed, gateway station around the moon, probably SLS getting stuff there, so cargo and people in an Orion capsule, as they call it. But then SpaceX with its Starship would go from Gateway to the moon's surface, so it will be the lander. This is what pissed Bezos off, because Jeff Bezos with his Blue Origin company also wanted to make that lander, lobbied and won. So
it's conditional, right? It's like SpaceX has to prove it. Yes. Unmanned so many times before they'll put someone in it, right?
Probably, but it's also very possible that SpaceX has thought like, okay, cool. If NASA wants to support us, in our trial runs, like, okay, we'll practice. We'll do some practice runs for the moon because Elon wants to go to Mars, of course. And then that would probably only be the lander. But I think things are moving so quickly. The Indians signing on, other people wanting to go to the moon, that I'm really curious to see if like a lot more will happen than even that we can grasp right now. Like even if you mentioned autonomous cargo, like that, I find that super like mind blowing already. It's like, of course, people need to make the software for this. They're gonna AI the fuck out of all of this as well, of course. Like anything that happens on Earth as a technological revolution will happen over there as well.
Makes it easier for like what are you going to bump into? You just put little bumpers on everything, and you just get down there and dock.
And you can see that space exploration used to be super slow because it was just so hard, expensive, and connected to government, which it didn't want anybody to blow up, because then taxpayer money would have caused somebody to blow up. And it's a little bit easier to blow stuff up with private money than with public money. So you'll see that this technology will develop itself much more rapidly in the coming decade, simply because the cost of launching something has come down so incredibly. It was billions 50 years ago, billions, and now it's millions. Like it went down more than a factor 1,000. So, and then we haven't even, like you mentioned it shortly, the moon base itself. Like the moon base itself, like what do you need on a moon base? What would you like to do on the moon? What will we do there when we're there?
I mean, the NASA video, right, has all this promise that there's awesome science to be had on the moon, and I'm sure that we'll learn a lot. And just having like an environment or having labs with like lower gravity, or being able to, benefit from closer access to space or lack of atmosphere, we could do more testing. But I think that it's really a test bed for Mars and for humans living farther out from Earth. And, this is a baby step. This is a half step to that. So it's just like, like if you're scuba diving and you do your first little sessions in the shallow water before you go do that, this is the moon is your kind of intro course to space exploration or living in space, I think. So for me, that's the cool part, is just getting there, learning that, what it's like to live in space and support that, and then being able to kind of realistically graduate that model to habitats that are further away. So for me, that's exciting, and I think that NASA has to, there's like this expectation with NASA that there's just going to be like innovation dropping all the time, and if we just do space things, then new consumer products will materialize from it. And I think that's true. And we can, even when we segue into some of the space related topics, that we were going to have.
That's something weird. Yeah. So give us one of those revolutionary things that you would need in space. Because now I do. Go look up your article. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I guess one of the interesting things, and again, like it's super nascent. It's not like they have like a cool solution, I don't think yet. But what's interesting, so this HTC is making VR for astronauts. And I think this makes like perfect logical sense. Like, of course, like this is a strong use case for VR.
Really? Okay, I thought it was completely gimmicky. So please convince me of this.
Yeah. So okay. So I think most use cases of VR are completely gimmicky, right? But for me, one of the main problems when I try to use VR, first of all, the best use case for VR, unequivocally, unquestionably, is porn. And I don't think anyone's ever going to dispute or can show otherwise. Like the number one use case, most people have adopted VR for porn. Primarily that is a stationary.
I do play games with my brother who lives in Vietnam, which I very much like. So
it's great. I have friends who do that, but it's still like a super low adoption rate, and it's like people that game in VR, like a small portion of their gaming time usually. There are
entertainment. VR so far has proven itself for entertainment, but
what game do you play?
Population 1, it's called. It's like an open world shooter. Yeah,
it's an open world shooter. So do you move around in that?
Yeah, you move around. Yeah, yeah.
So
So
how
you
does it work? Is it like grid based where you have like a block that you walk around in, like room
yeah. So
scale,
right
or?
here, I will make a virtual grid here, and so the moment I kind of reach for something that for a wall, so to speak, it will just sort of like warn me like, hey, you're bouncing through your virtual shield.
And can you teleport your cube
I don't
around?
teleport, so I kind of, it's like the same as on a controller. Say you're playing Grand Theft Auto on a controller or a shooter, you just walk around. Yet it also knows that I'm taking 2 steps back, so I can definitely walk to like a wall with the controller, and then just kind of peek around with it. It knows where I am. It's the Oculus Quest 2.
It's doing some sort of room scale
Yes.
thing.
Yeah. It does
I'm
know.
interested to try it. I've tried Pavlov was like the last VR shooter that I tried. I don't know if you've messed with Pavlov.
You have to
But
teleport.
well, you can walk around and you can do what you're saying, but you're either holding down forward on the controller, which for me creates motion sickness.
Oh.
Because if I'm not moving my body, and so some people associate it with with motion, and they'll like walk in place and you can move around. But anyways, the reason I think it's a strong use case is that I don't think VR has overall solved, and maybe there's newer stuff out and I can try it, I'll shut up, but has really solved for most people the VR motion sickness problem. And also movement in games, because even like Half-Life Alyx, which is kind of like a VR masterpiece,
Love it. Yeah.
it's a series of instances, it's a series of rooms and spaces that you go between. It's so for me, it's like the only time if I'm like in an open world in VR, or if I do Skyrim VR, the motion for me is personal. But anyways, if I were trapped in space and my muscles are atrophying because I'm not using them, and you're just on a treadmill or something, this seems like an interesting way, because you would not have what I would assume is if I don't have gravity, I wouldn't have that dissonance. And I'd be curious, right? Because so a lot of like, for me, what happens with motion sickness is what I'm seeing visually is different than what my middle ear's grokking as where I actually am spatially, right? So I would assume, I don't know, that in a zero gravity environment, maybe motion sickness would be different, but also just being kind of suspended in place and being able to like walk in place would be like an easier thing, and you could just kind of like run in place and then like move your character around that way because it's detecting your leg motion. Anyways, that's my thought of why it might be.
For some reason, it feels like it would make me way more motion sick.
It's so subjective, but I mean, if you look at the actual adoption numbers with VR, it's pretty low.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah, so I would love to edit videos in a real room. Like if one day I get to make videos in a VR space that looks like a classic sort of film room, like back in the day, where you would literally pick up clips and put them somewhere. I would love for like small finicky things that are now all in Adobe programs to become big again, so that we're not using like pen and pencil to make squealy little things all the time, but that we're just like an artist, sort of like you can make big movements.
You're talking about like the Minority Report interface. Everyone wants the Minority Report
interface.
You're like moving it around. Yeah,
I want to work out. I don't want to.
I agree, but I think that AR is going to give us that, and I think that that's why the Apple headset will be exciting to show practical AR, because if it's an overlay of your physical environment, then you're not going to feel as disconnected. I think there's like when you go into VR, you don't even know where your drink is. You don't know where your mouse is. You know who's walked up to you, right? AR, you can interface with the world around you, and then also I think not get motion sickness. But
yeah, so we need a solution that works. To bring it back to space.
With the HTC thing, I thought, a couple of like one of the things that was interesting is that the guy in the article is part of the enterprise division for HTC. So there's a commercial relationship that they're exploring, which I thought was interesting. And I think part of it is going to be, when you're in space, there's like the fitness related use cases. But I also think that when you're on Earth, there's probably a lot of training and simulation related use cases that could happen there. But I thought it was just interesting to say like, oh, cool, like they're investing, like they've staffed up an enterprise division and they're engaging with NASA. It's like a great data point. And then, yeah, like one of the problems that they were having, and it does actually talk about, I didn't fully understand exactly how they solved for it, but there was a problem with room scale with the Vive. And the way that they did it is they anchored one of the controllers in the room so that the person only uses one controller. And then that was like preventing them, because it was just basically glitching out because it couldn't track it. The VR wanted to assume that there was like something to anchor on as like a static environment. Anyways, so they have to figure it out. They have to, you know, I guess for me, if one is going to be optimistic that space exploration is going to give us cool new technologies, I would love to see advancements in VR that, you know, increase the adoption curve, that didn't make people like me sick. You know, because it's like I want to use it, but I don't want to put the work in to get VR legs, where it's like I have to be sick for months before I just get over it or something.
True. Although for all the VR fans out there, I want to say that I do not experience that motion sickness anymore. Maybe the first few times. In general, it does make me a bit woozy after an hour, of course. But generally,
if you're going after gamers, an hour is not that long. It's like a very short. I mean, it's like healthy probably just to game for an hour, but that's not what pays the bills for most gaming companies. You know?
No, that's true. That's true. In a general sense, what I really love about it is that you can see the sort of like how broad the space industry can become, and I've seen reports also like it. If you look at any other industry, it's like it's very small. Like it's a very small industry, even though it's epic, it's adventurous, it's historical, often philosophically valuable, but as a hard dollar sort of thing, it's in the tens or hundreds of billions, which is still very little compared to what the rest of the world is. But it's quickly and very rapidly growing. So within this decade, within these 20s, we will definitely see a huge further explosion of this all. But I think a lot of us are waiting for this. Let me share my screen again. And this one. And it's simply a Starbase. So I check in on these live feeds very often. There's 1,200 people watching now. I know that whenever something's launching, millions of people are watching. So a lot of people watching might know this, but that there's a constant live feed from here. I went to Boca Chica 1.5 years ago to go check this out, because what's happening here is definitely historical. They are prepping for their second test flight, but we're waiting for government approval. Right now, I think the Fish and Wildlife Administration is holding this up, which has been an interesting clash last month to see sort of like a proper government rules that apply to everyone, including SpaceX, clash with sort of like this very forward-looking, innovative, humanity-altering endeavor that's going on.
We're going to destroy the ecosystem of these tropical destinations in order to.
Yeah, please think of the turtles. There's like I believe there's this particular turtle that's in the Gulf of Mexico. That's
yeah. Why do we pick these like coastal areas versus just the middle of nowhere? And
it is the middle of nowhere. So you want something to land.
Oh, but I thought Boca Chica was still yeah. Show me Boca Chica.
Yeah, so Boca Chica is over here. Over here. So they were just pretty much saying
this is exactly what I thought it was. It's a coastal
in the United States. Which is, so here's the border between Mexico
it's
and the
remote, and that the average American doesn't care about what happens in this radius of space. But
and there's a beach here.
That also would hold true for maybe like, a frozen plain in the middle of Alaska or the Yukon Territory or something.
True. But so SpaceX was looking for a U.S. thing because there's legislation, right? Something that affected me as well.
I'm sure. Yeah, these are American jobs right there, right? So,
well, no, it's rocket technology. So the United States has very strict rocket technology laws, where if you're a foreign national, it's very, 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 very hard to be near anything that is rocket technology or protected rocket technology because of the Cold War. And so they needed a location in the US to at least make that easier. And otherwise, there's all these restrictions of like where you can ship the rocket technology. There's a big harbor here. You can see it over here near Brownsville that they can use. And it is still in the US. And of course, the Earth is turning, right? So the equator is over here. The Earth's spinning. You want to be as close to the equator as possible because you get that speed, that free speed over here. And they want to drop, and they want to launch something against the direction of the spinning of the Earth. So that's also the Gulf of Mexico.
I think it's that. I'm assuming that's why the wildlife, advocacy groups would care, is that like you are using the Gulf of Mexico as your crash bed. And if something
there's a wildlife refuge here. There's simply local, state,
all of that too. Yes.
Here. So there's even like it's a historic battlefield. So there's even like there's a historic.
This was like the Civil War. This was they were taken up here. This is the only way the Confederacy would get supplies through the blockades, right? So
you know more about that. I should know more about this, but I remember like man.
Yeah, there was a Confederate port town there. It used to have a different name, and it's like renamed.
There's a sign here somewhere. I think here somewhere. I'm not sure. There's a sign over here. I parked my car here or somewhere, and it had like a historical marker. And on one hand, I could see this. I could see these rockets on the horizon, and then this historical marker about some sort of battle from like 150 years ago in the Civil War. In the US.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, that's funny. It's like the historical. And then there were even. There's reports that and stuff that SpaceX has to file that these historical markers won't be damaged and stuff like that. It's just funny like how both
can they actually guarantee that even like because the rocket couldn't they guarantee that like if a rocket had some sort of catastrophic explosion?
Definitely. So they definitely have to write something about it. But the historical equivalency of those two things I just thought was very funny. Sort of like this will, I think, in my humble opinion, will definitely help bring humanity to sort of like 3.0 kind of situation where we become, I wouldn't say multiplanetary, but at least like we got rid of low Earth orbit. I got to see what happens on Mars. Like I'm not sure yet, but then this historical marker about like the U.S. Civil War, which was a very unfortunate chapter, but still it's not the same as launching rockets to the moon, in my humble opinion. And it's
if the Confederacy existed in 2024, they would have a space force.
They would definitely have a space force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I do think that like this is happening. This is not some far-flung dream anymore or something just for nerds. I think this is actually happening and going to be very spectacular to watch. This is one last little note that I wanted to mention. Like, what are we going to do there? Like, I really loved your answer on how what we can use the moon for, because we can definitely use it as a testing ground, sort of for like further exploration. But I do think that mining on the moon, or just using the moon for space mining in general, I think will happen. I think helium-3 mining is one of those things.
I don't like mining the moon. I think that we should mine the moon just for what we need to sustain life on the moon, but or not even that, because like
water,
it's gonna go away. Yeah, like it's just. But even like, the moon is just like, it's part of our night sky. Let's not mess with it. Like the moon should just be like a giant international park or something. And like, sure, let's keep human habitation there. Let's use it strategically and tactically as a launch pad for further space exploration. But let's preserve most of it. And the asteroid belt is right there. There's comets and shit flying by all the time that are rich in resource. And so I do understand, like, when you first land, when you first get a foothold on colonizing these new bodies in space, for sure survive. But let's have a plan. Let's have a plan to not destroy the moon. Is kind of my general thought. Like, let's not fuck with the moon.
Interesting. I haven't heard that enough yet, actually.
What I mean, is there no concern about destroying the moon? Like,
there is on my side, definitely. So I agree with you. But I was having these visions sort of on the moon. I was looking at the moon the other day, and just thinking like, wow, will a Jersey-like industrial zone start to appear there. Just like, will we be able to see this moon base? I think eventually yes. Depends on where it is, of course.
The South Pole, right?
What will it look like? Yeah, I mean, the moon was forever, like for all our ancestors, just this goddess in the sky, and still for like astrologists and whatnot, you know, they still think it all has magical powers. And even as a atheist, technologist, whatever, I agree with you that there's some sort of serenity to the moon that we should just keep like a park,
yeah, I mean,
even though
look,
it's dead.
Atheists like nature and national parks, and I
Yes.
think that's the moon is that. But you know, by all means, like Artemis is exciting and we should be there. But yeah, there was the one other thing I know.
Is there
gotta call it in a few minutes here, but yeah,
sure.
the notion of mining things, I do think that space mining is super cool, and I do think that it will drive us to space in lots of ways. And if you've heard me drone on about that for a long time, where there's just so much money, there's so many trillions of dollars in resource that exists in space, that we're going to be able to get that and start tapping into that through automation, through sending robots out that can mine it and bring it back. And I think that'll create a new frontier, and people willing to go out and work on those robots and like do whatever human things might be required at the edges of those boundaries. I think that's exciting stuff. So I am a fan of space mining, just not on the moon.
And there have been multiple missions now to asteroids to get samples. Like there was a recent sample return mission from Psyche. And you can see that we already have the technology to go there, grab a little piece, and there was actually so much in there that they couldn't get the cap off, I believe, when it landed, which is interesting. So yes, we can already mine. We've mined our first asteroid just like in the last couple of years, so to speak. It just got back. It's just parking it in orbit and just putting the brakes on an asteroid so that we can mine it and bring it home. The amount of energy that you need to get it in a fixed position where we can use it.
Well, so
that's the cost right now.
Part of what was interesting in this article, I think, for sure, no doubt, what you're saying is absolutely true. Part of what was interesting, I thought, in this one is that there's some fancy kind of scientific chemistry terms here that I had to read up on to kind of understand eutectic. And eutectic is that's my word of the week, but today I learned. But eutectic is basically a fancy word for you make a compound, you add something to a material, and then the combination of those materials lowers the melting point. So like the melting point of those two things would be higher individually, isolated, but together the eutectic reaction would be that they have a lower melting point. I think that someone can correct me out there, but but so what was interesting though is that it's the premise would be that it would dissolve the metals and then extract the dissolved metals. And so in the sense that you had a space rock with all of these dissolved metals kind of around the rock and the rocky material, right? You would be able to extract those. So presumably the rocky part could just keep going and you're sucking the metal out, and then you bring that back to wherever you're going.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that actually these topics are some of the stuff that we're going to talk about, like in all of our next episodes, because this is just one little thing. We have a lot of AI stuff coming up, neurological stuff coming up, but space, I think we're both super interested in it, and a lot is going to happen. And I think I want to ask the viewers, if you're out there and you made it this far, super thanks. Like, awesome. Keep following us. We're going to expand on our social media presence and make sure that you'll be able to find us. So we'll put links wherever they need to be. But also, like, what do you guys think that we should do in space? Like, is this what are the most valuable parts? Where should we put our focus also in research, I think? Like when it comes to space mining, because it's still a broad topic, like what kind of materials, where are they? How much does it cost to get them? Are there recent reports about them? Like any sort of valuable information that you can give us to really like, that we can do research on, like what's actually happening and what's actually valuable, and keep it away from all the aspirational stuff from 30 years ago. Because this stuff is happening.
Well, yeah, we'd love to talk to people too. Like if you own a space mining company too, we'd love to be your friend and talk to you.
Exactly. So a lot more in these. And so I think this was a short episode. Generally, we try to run between 30 minutes and an hour, I think, in general. And to give some quick updates on like certain themes or topics or whatnot. So
absolutely,
pilot,
we'll come back with more in the future.
Right.
That's a wrap. Thanks so much.
It's a wrap. Thanks, guys.
Okay.